Hey, psych people. This is the third time I've tried to do this because every time I try and do it, I get some kind of lockdown alert, which I think everybody on the planet knows Denver is locking down at 5 o'clock today. Anyway, this is the second in my video series for you psych kids, and I'm going to try and expand on some of the Maslow-Rogers stuff we were doing yesterday. So after you get to that point in Maslow's hierarchy where your self-esteem needs are met, at that point you're ready to ask yourself, if am I someone who will self-actualize? Well, what is self-actualization? Self-actualization as a complex term, it carries a lot, but essentially a term, something you're familiar with. It would be the idea of the ego and the self lining up in Freudian terms. And that's where the individual is comfortable with who they are. Okay? And so how do you identify this? Rogers and Maslow gave us a few things that are indicative of the self-actualizing person. Okay? The first of those is the self-actualizing person embraces the unknown. One of the things that I've been looking at, with this whole COVID-19 thing is, how can we grow intellectually from this? We don't know. There's so many variables. We don't really understand it. We don't know a whole lot about it. How do I turn this into a positive and embrace it as something that is unknown, and to actually be attracted by the opportunity to grow from it? I know it's really easy for me to sit here and say, but that's what the self-actualizing person, that's how the self-actualizing person is looking at this. Okay? By no means are you expected to be able to go down this list of the things that are indicative of a self-actualizing person and say, oh, I'm knocking every one of these out of the park. Nobody's knocking all of these out of the park. These are things that you are consistently working on as a self-actualizing person. So, second characteristic would be the individual accepts themselves for who they are with their flaws. They no longer see flaws in themselves or other people. They see things that they can work on and things that they can help other people with, if other people want help. But they don't see these things as flaws. They see these things as elements of humanity and the human psyche. So when we're dealing with a self-actualizing person, because they're comfortable with who they are. And that's the key. That's one of the things that we try and teach you consistently at Regis. We try and teach you to grow more comfortable with who you are, so that you can then, instead of projecting elements that you're uncomfortable with in your own life onto other people, you can project an element of support and empathy. Okay? So number 2 is accepting everything about yourself, complete with the flaws. A big part of this is, Rogers kind of added this to Maslow's ideas, and that is the whole idea of the journey, not the destination. Maslow was looking for a way to say this, and Rogers kind of chimed in, and he, I believe he wrote a book called The Journey. It's something about the journey and not the destination. Anyway, what does this mean? This is essentially that whole Eastern ideal of living in the here and now, living in the moment and not obsessing over the future and what's going to happen in the future. That's the whole journey, not the destination. The destination is great. It's amazing. And one of the things that's really, that I've had a remarkable opportunity to travel quite a bit. And you'll go to, I remember when we used to go on surf trips a lot, you would go to most of the places you would go to would be sort of third world type places, and it would be such a pain in the ass getting to the waves. But then one of the things I started to notice is I would get home and I would reflect on the trip that I had just done, and all of the things that seemed like a pain in the ass, I would have, sort of this nostalgic remembrance of. And that's because you really can't, when you're traveling in the developing world, you really can't obsess on the destination because it takes forever to get to the destination. So you have to you're constantly making fun in the moment. And I by no means was a self-actualizing person at the age of 18, 19, 20, 26, 50. But I do understand how this works. So that whole idea of the journey, not the destination, is a really important one to these guys. Living in the moment, that Eastern idea. Number 4, most self-actualizing people tend to be unconventional, okay? But at the same time, they don't seek to upset the harmony of the world, but they're unconventional. They'll try new things that are different. They will experiment. They will read new things. They will, taste new things. Let's not go tasting exotic animals, though. I think that we can cross that one off the list. But they don't seek. Unconventional isn't shock. Unconventional is just taking a different approach. Someone like Madonna, who has spent her entire life trying to shock, that's not self-actualizing. Maybe she might be really self-actualized, I don't know. But that's more about disruption. Unconventionality isn't, if you're self-actualizing, about disruption. So it's more about, hey, is there another way to do this? Self-actualizing people are really motivated by growth. If you are someone who wants to grow, and I try and tell people, over and over, growth is not something that comes in giant steps. Growth is something that comes in tiny, tiny steps, and then you go back, and then you take. And this is why being motivated by growth can be very difficult, because it's one step forward, 2 steps back, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. So when I try and talk to someone about this, the most important thing I try and express to them is, don't get frustrated by the process. You're not going to grow overnight. You're going to grow in tiny pieces, and take the tiny piece and embrace the tiny piece. Put it up like a trophy and forget about the steps backward. You can address those, but take that growth and hold that up and focus on that. Purpose is another one of the self-actualizing traits. You feel like you have a purpose. You're going to go forward. You're going to go to college. What are you going to do? Are you going to this healthcare thing? I'll be shocked if many of you don't go into healthcare. I think it's one of the most beautiful things we have seen in this COVID-19 is watching these people with this incredible sense of purpose, and that sense of purpose is helping other people, and they show up to work and put themselves in rooms with people that have this virus, and they just do it every day. That's what a sense of purpose is. For me, teaching and coaching is what I loved. I love doing this stuff. And I loved working for a lot of different companies. Marriott Hotels was an amazing company, but I didn't feel the sense of purpose. Others might. It's a great company and a great job, but purpose. Do you feel like you have that sense of purpose? Next up, don't get troubled by the small things. Small things that just in the long run don't matter. What matters are the big things, family, your faith, your all these relationships, your ability to be intimate with people and to see beauty. These are the big things. And, another trait, they form deep relationships. You get a little of that with your retreat system. I think Regis does a good job trying to get you to feel that empathy, because the only way you can have a deep relationship is with empathy. Okay? So take a look at your relationships and say, do I feel? It took me a very long time to get to where I could form very deep relationships. Again, this is not something you'll do overnight. And the final character trait that I'd like to discuss here of a self-actualizing individual is they are not molded by culture. You have to break out of that. We don't, be who you are. That doesn't mean you don't enjoy cultural things, but don't let culture mold you. Okay? It's okay to love different trends, and it's great. Social media is wonderful. Social media is the reason I'm able to teach from home, but don't let social media shape you. That's what I would say is the lesson of this last attribute. So, embrace the unknown. They accept themselves. It's the journey, not the destination. They're unconventional, but they don't seek to shock. Okay? They're motivated by growth. There's purpose. Okay? They're not troubled by small things. They form deep relationships, and they are not molded by culture. These are the characteristics and the attributes of a self-actualizing person. I'm going to put a couple things online. And so for this week's homework, it's strictly Maslow. So what I'm going to put on there will be Maslow, Rogers, humanist-based. So anyway, again, I miss you. I hope I'm back soon. And thank you for listening. We'll see you.